Nau mai haere mai, piki mai, kaki mai, kia ora i tiwi, and welcome to 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We do 30 minutes with one guest and no cuts, so what we record is what you get. Sir Bill English, he was Finance Minister for 3 terms, steering the economy through the rough seas of the global financial crisis from 2008 right up to 2017 when he took over as Prime Minister from John Key. He took National to 44% on election night 2017, but lost the MMP auction, with Winston Peters choosing Jacinda Ardern's Labour, which had only scored 37% of the vote. Bill English spent nearly 30 years in Parliament, key roles in health and education as well as finance. He's been out of politics for nearly 8 years now. So what does he make of the current landscape? He doesn't often give interviews, so here is a rare chance to hear his take on today's challenges. Let's start the clock. 30 minutes with Bill English. Sir Bill English, welcome to 30.
Good to be here, Guyon.
Thanks very much for coming in. This is a question the pollsters ask. I'll put it to you. Is New Zealand on the right track or the wrong track?
Oh, I'm pretty optimistic, actually. I think we're on roughly the right track. There's things happening now that need to happen in an economy. It's pretty sticky for a lot of people, but it'll come right. So here's a forecast. In 12 to 18 months, we'll be growing faster than Australia.
What do you base that on?
Well, official forecasts for a start. That's what the central banks think. But also, I spent a bit of time in Australia, involved in various businesses and foundations over there. And we're dealing with, as New Zealand often does, with some pretty gritty stuff. Like we beat ourselves up about it, whether we're getting there or not getting there or doing the right thing. But we're dealing with it partly because we have to. Good examples, housing, where I think we're making really good progress actually there, and that's going to be of generational benefit in New Zealand to have a bit more functional, affordable housing market. Well, in Australia, they haven't even got started really.
Yes, because that massive increase in housing prices, and we saw it during the time you were Finance Minister under the Key government, and part of that was the consequences of an economy that was actually firing along pretty well, and people wanted to come here, right? We've seen that dip back. We've seen more first-time home buyers enter the market too, haven't we, recently? But we've got a real problem at the social housing end, I guess. You've spent some time looking at those issues too, right?
Yeah, I have, and again, I'm optimistic about that. I was involved in an inquiry for the government, and what impressed me was the energy and innovation out in the community, and the desire to do social housing better, and I think it can be done a lot better. Just another reason to be a bit optimistic, I think.
We haven't seen the growth that we'd hoped for though, have we, so far? Why haven't we seen that, do you think?
Well, it's I think it's to some extent the hangover from the big party, COVID, and then particularly the post-COVID one where the party just went on too long, and we got high inflation, and I think we've all relearnt a lesson. High inflation is a bad thing for an economy, and it's particularly bad for the lower income part of the community. But I think there's other structural kind of longer term change going on, and the housing market being one that really matters. You've got this amazing, almost bipartisan view that we need to change the rules for housing so that it's more affordable. That's, I think, got going under the Key government, was continued particularly by people like Phil Twyford and the Labour government, and certainly by Chris Bishop now. And that's pretty fundamental. I mean, if you look back, and it's one of the reasons the economy feels like it's struggling to get up out of the mud, because the usual cycle is housing prices pick up, people feel good, they start spending again, and that's a quicker kind of recovery.
Yes, that's right.
And this time that's not happening that way.
And especially in this city, in Auckland, where we are today, you know, the halo effect of the housing market has what's driven Aucklanders out to the shops again, usually, isn't it? And it raises that question, can we get the recovery without that? And you know, where is that coming from? I mean, the government has blamed the Trump tariffs of 15% on our exports, but rural New Zealand seems to be doing pretty well. You spend some time there. Do you think that Trump tariffs have hit us?
Oh, I think that sort of general geopolitical uncertainty and the the unpredictability of the US, the uncertainty about the rules-driven and international system, it has some effect, no doubt about that. But I think probably the thing that is probably the housing that is making this a longer recovery. But in the long run, that's a good thing. I mean, our poor quality housing policy in the past has driven a lot of inequality. It's driven a lot of a burden on low-income people trying to afford housing. And there is just one illustration of why the sort of structural shift. If you look at sort of indicator interest rates through your and my whole adult life, they were dropping. So nominal interest rates were 22% when we were 20 years old, and they got down to 3% just a couple of years ago. So housing was a one-way bet for that whole generation. As long as you held the asset, you knew the value would go up. Well, it can't happen again. Like, it just can't, because we've got low interest rates, lowish interest rates now. So now it's just going to be less predictable. And that will change our investment patterns. It'll change our saving patterns for the better. So
do you think housing will be a less attractive investment for people? Because there's been a lot of criticism about how we've piled our money into housing investment. It's not a productive area of the economy, and that's held us back. Do you think we're going to see less investment into those assets of housing?
Yes, I do, because I think the return is going to be less predictable. There'll still be housing that people buy a house in the right location, the right size, for the right demographic. That's still going to be value creating. Land or usually drifts up a bit, but you wouldn't want to underestimate the long-term impact of the regulation changes that have been pushed pretty hard by the current government.
That's a good thing in your view, that we're going to be piling less money into housing investment.
Yeah, it is. It's a good thing, not just for the investment effect, that is people investing more in other productive activities, but just the household income effect. I mean, the cost of housing has been very high, and it's driven a lot of this concern about inequality. I mean, I have the good fortune these days to work with a lot of under 40-year-olds, under 30-year-olds. And it's a big issue for them, and it's a cause of some resentment, and a cause of some more extreme political views or policy views, with some justification. And I think it's important.
I was going to ask you that. So that's interesting. So they are justified in that view, do you think? That anger or resentment at, I guess, the boomers, or those policy settings which increased inequality?
Yeah, well, it's a matter of fact. I mean, it's not really a matter of opinion. It is a fact, and I've had the view for some time that if the political class didn't move to ameliorate that problem, that to enable more flexible supply of land, lower cost ability to build houses, then you would see quite a strong bounce back from that younger generation in the form of extensive taxation of housing, for instance. And this is where I think New Zealand is doing a better job than a lot of other countries, and it's cause for optimism if you reflect on it.
So in that context, how do you greet the idea of a capital gains tax? Labor's narrowed it right down basically to commercial property and to any second property, really just investment properties. Your stamp collections out, your furniture collections out, all of that sort of stuff. I've narrowed it right down to that. What do you think?
Well, look, there'll be a political argument about that, obviously, and I don't want to get involved in that. But the argument around capital gains tax has always been the same. New Zealand's always had a capital gains tax. This sounds like an extension of that, and different finance ministers, myself, Michael Cullen, came to the same conclusions with the same advice. That is, there's a lot of complexity, not much revenue, and I would say that possibility of revenue is significantly less now than it would have been, say, 10 years ago and certainly 20 years ago.
Because the capital gains that you're talking about aren't there, you mean?
Well, they're just much less predictable. I mean, I'd love to ask the officials who are meant to do the forecasts whether they are using past experience or not, because I don't think past experience is going to tell us about the future in this case around capital gains on housing.
But the sky's not going to fall in, though, with the capital gains tax that Labor's proposing, is it? I mean, it seems
no, I wouldn't think the sky's going to fall in, no. Particularly if it doesn't collect much in the way of revenue. I mean, all taxes should change behaviour. They can be, disruptive, unpredictable, whatever. There'll be a political argument about it. We'll leave that to the politicians.
You talked about inequality. I mean, I looked at the Stats New Zealand numbers on this for 2024. The wealthiest 10% of households held about 50% of total household net worth. I mean, is that the sort of thing that you're saying is unsustainable?
Well, look, I think unsustainable, what does that mean? There's going
I suppose
there's going to be a revolution and overturn.
Well, yeah.
Or whatever.
I guess so. And you hinted at it, not a revolution in terms of guillotines, I'm not talking French Revolution, but anger, resentment, polarisation, just that human thing about saying, well, why is all the wealth drifting to people at the top? I mean, you were at Jim Bolger's funeral recently. When we interviewed him for the Ninth Floor, he said that neoliberal policies had failed, and I know that's a bit of a trigger word, but we all kind of know what we mean by this. He said that they've failed to produce economic growth, and what growth there has been has gone to the few at the top. And I guess that's the Trump sort of revolution too, isn't it?
Well, there's a sort of technical, historical term, Jacksonian revolutions, of which the Trump thing is pretty much exactly that, which in that case I think goes back to the big bank bailouts in the financial crisis, which people had every reason, normal everyday wage earning people had every reason to resent. This is why we talked about the housing, because that has been a principal driver of that. Which, and oddly enough, I disagree with Mr. Bolger about this, respectfully. I don't think the housing issues were to do with neoliberalism. They were actually to do with over-planning our cities. Poor planning causes poverty. It causes higher costs than would otherwise be the case. And that's why I'm optimistic about it. I think in New Zealand, where the political, particularly the current government, but they're building on a lot of work, are heading off some of the more extreme expressions of that, if they can get the housing market, as that looks like they will, into an equilibrium where people can afford it.
Yeah, but at the same time we are seeing, and I see it with my own eyes working in the CBD in Auckland, real issues with homelessness. I mean, I can walk down Hobson Street and see literally some days dozens of people, setting up on the street with their sleeping bags, tents at some point, real depravity, real poverty with our own eyes. And now we're talking about, should we ban them from being in the city and move them on? I mean, is that the answer?
Well, look, that's, again, another political argument. I'm not going to get into that. But what you do know is that more housing at affordable cost is going to create more places for them. And doing a job of where government's directly intervening in social housing, that job can be done considerably better with the resources we have, and help alleviate that problem. And those processes are underway. Again, I'm a bit optimistic about it.
How would that happen? How would that work?
Well, don't get me started on social housing. Classic state monopoly has done a poor job for a long time. That is now really, with the pressure of innovation and energy in the broader housing interested community, iwi, NGOs who really know what they're doing, starting to break that up. They'd just do a better job of caring about tenants themselves and finding the kind of localised individual and whānau type solutions that work for actual individuals. we did a bit of work actually on homelessness here in Auckland through one of our businesses, which showed there are quite dramatic benefits to the broader system. Hospitalisation rates, for instance, a group of homeless, cohort of over 100 homeless, mainly men actually, with mental illness, if you got them into stable housing with the right support, not just any house, they have to have the right kind of support, it dropped their average nights in hospital in a year or in a cell from about 130 nights a year to 10. So,
and is that the kind of housing first model that you don't have to be perfect, you might not even be sober, but you've got to start in a house and take it from there?
That does seem to work. Now the question is, of course, how you get more of that to happen. But that's doable. There's only a few thousand people across the country in that situation. It's difficult for them. But these problems are not overwhelming. It's become part of this crisis rhetoric, particularly around social issues, which is almost a hangover from the COVID times when there was a crisis. The sort of crisis rhetoric that all these problems are too big to solve, and that's actually not the case. Better organised, better focused activity, taxpayer funded, can make quite a difference to these sort of problems.
But not necessarily provided by the state. That's been your argument, isn't it? You are concerned that we're too statist about this and we're too worried about who is providing it rather than what is being provided. Is that a fair summation of your kind of view?
Yeah, and actually we spend a bit of time in through our business we run called Impact Lab, looking at exactly how this works on the ground. And what's impressive from that is the expertise, the motivation, the energy and the success that so many organisations have dealing with these social problems. It makes you feel optimistic that many of them can be improved, not completely solved probably, but certainly improved.
When you look back at your time as Finance Minister in the key government, I mean, New Zealand's economy was growing faster than many in the world, wasn't it? And then the Australians called us the rock star economy. And look, it was tough times through the global financial crisis. But we had that growth, and we had our mojo to that degree that people wanted to come here, didn't they? And immigration was rising. You don't get that sense now. Why is that, do you think?
Oh, look, it's not, in a sense, not that fair to compare the past because, it's different circumstances. We had stronger population growth. There was a lot of, quite a big kick up out of the growth in the dairy industry at the time. And certainly the earthquake recovery in Christchurch had a significant impact on the economy taking off. But look, I think, so each generation's got to find its own motivation and aspiration. And, New Zealand's just going through a tough patch. There's clearly debate about the direction and so on. But in the long run, I'm not a great believer in this idea that, it's all about government showing bold leadership, which is a bit of a mantra that comes out of, say, the business community. Actually, what works is government doing the hard work of sorting out those barriers that are getting in the way of productive investment and, more importantly, productive employment, because that's a fundamental measure of how well you're going.
Sure, but some of it is cheerleading, isn't it? You worked very closely with John Key, whose retail politician skills were undoubtedly part of that, weren't they?
Oh well, I think they certainly help with confidence, but even in the medium term, it's what you do that matters. I mean, you could argue that the government that came after us, the Labor government, had a charismatic leader. It didn't lead to a great deal of economic confidence because the underlying policies were headed off in a different direction.
When you look at this government and you look at it's a three-party coalition in government, you'll see quite often daily scraps between the partners. We just saw them recently over asset sales. The National Party's pretty keen to do that. New Zealand First predictably doesn't want to do it, and there's tension there and public disagreement. Do you think MMP's working the way that we hoped it would?
I think it is actually. You just use those examples. the public have a amazingly refined view, in my experience, of what's the balance of stable government. And this government, it's a bit less sort of clean cut and well presented, but it is stable. I mean, no one questions whether the government's got a coherence and it's getting through a whole lot of serious issues. They may or may not like the politics around it or the personalities, but I think they've done a remarkably good job, and probably unexpectedly good job, of managing themselves. And they all deserve credit, Prime Minister and the two leaders of the other parties, because they've got an equilibrium. And I'm making those comments not just as a former politician, but sitting outside it, involved in running businesses, involved with a wide range of New Zealanders doing all sorts of stuff, from being unemployed through to, growing fast-growing IT businesses or carers, or and from outside, they know what they're dealing. They can criticise it or disagree with it or support it, but they know what it is, and it's stable and it's working.
Do you think that Chris Luxon is doing a good job as Prime Minister?
Well, I think he's doing the job he does, and he's quite an unusual Prime Minister. No one's got from entering Parliament to Prime Minister faster than Chris Luxon. He got there faster than David Lange, faster than John Key, and they were prodigious political talents. And what's going on there is, look, some people don't like his style or whatever, but if the biggest single issue in your economy is housing, this government is dealing with it in a way that past governments either haven't or haven't been able to. So I would say measure the man by what gets done.
He's not resonating with the public, though, is he? That's not an opinion. That's so many polls, more polls than you could shake a stick at, are saying that he's not resonating with the public. And National's poll ratings are very, very low for the dominant party in a first-term government, aren't they, to be in the early 30s?
Yeah, well, look, there's a few political challenges there, but I'd say if you think of the context of what's happening in politics around the world, look at the significant changes going on in British politics, some of the weird stuff that went on in Canadian politics around the Trump and the election there. In that context, that's not, I wouldn't say it's extraordinary. And of course, the test of it is an election. And what we know about elections is that MMP elections are always close. There's always just a few seats in it. And I'd expect the current government will win the next election.
Do you think so? So you think Christopher Luxon should take National through and fight that election? There's a lot of talk, isn't there, about whether they should switch him out for someone else. Do you think he's the man?
Yeah, well, look, it doesn't work to change prime ministers, that's for sure. No, I think they'll go through it, but I think they'll win. And it's not so much not about the personalities, obviously. He's come after two of the most popular prime ministers we've had, John Key and Jacinda Ardern.
I think you were in there somewhere.
I was in there somewhere, but I didn't quite make the level of popularity that they did. What matters to people is are they doing things that that are going to improve people's outlooks and aspirations?
Gee, they need some payback, though, don't they? I mean, they need to show people that they need some reward. People are saying, well, okay, we've been told this growth's coming. You started this interview by saying 12, 18 months. But gee, we've been hanging on a long time, eh? We were told survive to 25, and it's been a long struggle for New Zealand, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, look, this is all just the normal toing and froing of political narrative and who's telling the best story and whether they're getting it right or whether they're not. I'm just making the point, New Zealand's dealing with some structural shifts in its economy, which means its recovery is slower. But in a sense, it'll be a higher quality recovery because it won't be dependent on some big shift in house prices, and it won't be as dependent on a surge in immigration. And I see that happening in the sort of underlying positive processes happening in the businesses which are working, which is quite a range of them. Where you can see people's confidence picking up. The kind of realism is gritty, and thus, they can see a path ahead.
I want to talk about politics a little bit in the last 5 or 6 minutes we've got. You worked with the Māori Party for 3 terms, and they were, in government with you. Do you recognise the Māori Party that we see now?
People forget that, I mentioned to someone the other day, we spent 3, sort of a season. I would have thought it someone around Wellington who politically conscious, and they just didn't believe me. Well, I said, I was there, they were
and delivered some real stuff too, eh? Whānau order and other policies. I mean, they actually did the hard work around the cabinet table.
Oh, and there was quite a lot of tension with it as well. Over I remember quite a long, intensive discussion about the role of the Crown with respect to te reo, and whose responsibility it was, and how much is the Crown and how much is actually whānau and iwi who own the language. The Crown doesn't own the language. So do I recognise it? Well, I don't spend a whole lot of time following it, but it is different. I mean, the Tariana Turia in particular, and Pita Sharples, if you remember, when they first set up the Māori Party, one of the things they did was they took Parliament seriously. And they gave quite structured speeches. They were very respectful of the institution. And it was amazing how quickly that built their credibility in the political world, which then spilled over into voter world. And the term that we always used in the discussions, which I have to say were often heated, was mana enhancing.
Yes, I remember it.
Right. So, in the end, are we all going to come out of this better? And I have to say, while it was a often challenging experience, it was a satisfying one. And I was myself spent quite a lot of time on this boundary between the Māori Party and the iwi leaders group, because when a national government comes in, there's always people who want to be the Māori gatekeepers, and they contest that. And in that case, they had to find an equilibrium, and part of the success of that 9 years was that they did.
Yes, and so that was interesting, wasn't it? Because you had a Māori Party, and Māori have traditionally voted more for Labour, obviously, and so you had some coalescing there. I'm just wondering if you see a greater polarisation now. You saw ACT pursue the Treaty Principles Bill, which was pretty poorly received. What did you make of that?
Well, I'd see it as, you've got to remember...
Poorly received by Māori.
The Māori Party was, as it was originally conceived, was essentially conservative. And I don't mean in the sort of National Party's right-wing sense, but conservative in that they were trying to rebuild social connection, self-reliance, and Tariana Turia was strongly of that direction. And that's who she tended to attract and to work with her. I think what you've seen recently has been a kind of general political correction. What I find interesting is that there's a debate going on in the political world about whether one party's anti-Māori or whatever. In the real world, the custom and the practice of the people just moves on. There's more te reo language used in everyday more te reo words used in everyday language. There's in the business world, dealing with iwi is now completely normal. People recognise the type of investor. They are long-term, intergenerational investors. That's attractive to some capital, not to others. There's a whole world that services that economic momentum that they have.
Regardless of the signals from government.
Yeah, and what's been going on, I think, is a correction which I think was actually, personally, I think was necessary, particularly in the public service, where performative biculturalism had got completely out of control. I'm a bit cynical about the public service in Māori. While they say all sorts of stuff, in my experience, the public service is still a powerful monopoly which pushes people who can't compete to the edge. But on the surface, they were spending a lot of time on performative cultural experience. That's being corrected as it should, because a lot of voters in the 23 election felt that their own public institutions, which are taxpayer funded, had got away on them a bit. And look, again, I'm optimistic. There's nothing wrong with a bit of pushing and shoving when you think the Constitution's at stake, the constitutional arrangements. I mean, people care about that. There's nothing wrong in a democracy with groups trying to get more access to influence and power. And iwi and Māori have been pretty successful at that.
They have.
Yeah.
Just a minute left. Is there something that you wish you had done that you didn't get done? What would that be?
Oh, well, I don't spend too much time on that just because it's not that relevant, but I wish I'd done a lot. Wish I'd pushed harder on social investment at the time, because it's quite hard to crack the universalist philosophy in a public service, which still does a very poor job of servicing the bottom 20% of the population. They're still getting poor service, improving a bit at the margin, but a long way to go. And we probably could have pushed more on housing sooner. There were big steps taken, like the Auckland rezoning is now studied as an international example. That happened in about 2010, 11, 12, and gave us a chance to have a reasonable housing market. But we could have done more faster there.
But you don't miss politics?
No, I don't. We run our own life. I'm in business with our children. I can support my wife as much as she needs because she's got a very busy medical practice. And I've got flexibility in my life, and I don't have to answer tough questions from journalists all the time, Guy.
Well, thanks for coming in and answering some of them today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was 30 Minutes with Sir Bill English. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time. Ka kite.